untouched by machines or iron roads, the lands of early America stretched endlessly, forests so deep they swallowed sound, plains so wide that the horizon itself seemed to breathe. Before the first hunt began, life moved with the rhythm of the earth. The people knew the voice of wind through the cedar, the turning of the sun across the high peaks, and the movement of herds long before they could be seen. Hunting was not merely survival, it was communion. The earth was a living body, and every creature, elk, deer, bison, salmon, rabbit, eagle, was part of that great breathing spirit. The hunters understood that to take life was to join that cycle, not to dominate it. As morning fog drifted through pine forests, hunters moved with reverence. They rose before the first light, whispering silent thoughts of respect to the spirits of the land. Every step had meaning. Tracks in the dirt told stories of the night, where deer had grazed, where wolves had passed, where streams still carried fresh prints from the thirsty elk. They read these signs as if reading from a sacred book, one written by wind, water, and hoof. A broken twig meant a path taken at dusk. The faint musk in the air revealed the presence of game nearby. Every sense was alive, sharpened not by haste, but by stillness. In the woodlands of the east, the hunt began with patience. Hunters wore the scent of earth, sometimes covering themselves in mud or crushed leaves to mask their presence. They carried bows carved from hickory and arrows fletched with turkey feathers, their points shaped from flint and obsidian, napped to razor edges that could glide through fur and bone with quiet precision. The hunters would wait for hours, sometimes days, concealed among the brush, their bodies blended with the world around them, motionless, part of the trees, the wind, and the soil. They listened, not just with ears but with heartbeats, attuned to every rustle of grass and the breath of the forest. When deer appeared at last, they did not rush. The shot was not an act of conquest, it was a promise kept between life and sustenance. The arrow's flight was a moment of perfect silence, a line drawn between respect and necessity. Beyond the forests, where the world opened into vast plains of gold and shadow, other peoples followed the herds of buffalo. These plains stretched from horizon to horizon, alive with movement, thousands of bison shifting like dark clouds across the earth. Here, hunting was grander, more dangerous, more communal. The people of the plains, such as the Lakota and Cheyenne, relied on every season's migration, reading the sky to know when the great herds would move. Before the horse came, they hunted on foot, forming long lines to drive the buffalo toward cliffs or corrals built of stone and wood. It was a test of courage and precision, of knowing the land so well that even its wind could be trusted. When the horse arrived, brought from across the ocean, the rhythm of hunting changed forever. The horse became a partner, swift and intelligent, carrying the hunter into the heart of the herds. Together, man and horse became one, a new balance born between speed and instinct. But in every region, whether on horseback or on foot, hunting remained sacred. It was guided by gratitude. Before and after each hunt, songs were sung and prayers were offered, not to claim victory, but to honor the spirit of the life taken. Bones and hides were used, meat was shared, and nothing was wasted. In the gathering twilight, fires glowed softly across the camps. Smoke drifted into the night air, carrying the scent of roasted meat, sweet grass, and pine resin. Elders told stories of ancient hunts, of ancestors who once followed the mammoth and the mastodon, and of the spirits who still watched over the people's steps. The day ended as it began, in quiet reverence. The hunt was not finished when the arrow flew or the animal fell. It ended only when gratitude was spoken to the earth that gave and received life once more. And as the stars awakened in the dark sky, the hunters rested, not as conquerors, but as caretakers of an eternal balance. Before every hunt, before the first arrow was loosed into the wind, there was the shaping of tools, the quiet, rhythmic labor that tied human hands to the ancient memory of the earth. Across the wide lands of early America, in villages hidden beneath cedar groves, and along the bends of rivers that shone like mirrors at dawn, the people prepared for survival through craft and patience. They sat by the fire's glow, their faces half lit by amber light, shaping the stones that would guide their lives. From the riverbeds and mountain ridges, they gathered flint, chert, and obsidian, stones born of fire, glass-like and strong, holding within them the memory of creation itself. With the tap of bone against stone, sparks leapt into the air, each strike shaping the earth's bones into tools of purpose. Thin flakes fell like petals, and slowly the lifeless rock became a living edge. These were not mere weapons. Each blade and arrowhead was an offering, something between a prayer and a promise. Hunters worked in silence, listening to the sound of each fracture, reading the stone's will as if it spoke. A well-shaped point carried not only precision, but spirit. It was believed that the earth remembered those who shaped it with care. When the stones were ready, they were bound to life through the gifts of the forest. Wood from ash and hickory, straight and patient, became the shafts that would carry the hunter's hope. Sinew, pulled from the legs and backs of deer, was dried and twisted into strong, golden threads. Feathers from eagle, hawk, and turkey were gathered with respect, each one chosen for balance and grace. Together they became the flight of the arrow. Wind, wood, and spirit joined in one purpose. The making was slow, deliberate, and filled with reverence. A hunter's tools were part of himself. When the bough bent beneath his hand, it carried the heartbeat of the tree from which it came. When the arrow flew, it carried the breath of the bird that once soared. Nothing was wasted, and nothing was taken without thanks. In the deep woods, tools were tested long before the hunt began. The people moved silently among the trees, learning the patterns of wind and animal alike. They studied the way a leaf trembled, the faint curve of a hoof print pressed into soft earth, a snapped twig, a trail of broken moss. These were the words of the wilderness, and they read them as one might read an ancient book. For smaller creatures, the hunters relied not on chase, but on patience. They built traps from branches and stone, snares woven from bark and fiber. These traps rested along the trails of rabbits and foxes, hidden beneath leaves and roots. In the morning light, when frost still clung to the grass, the hunters would walk quietly to check them, hearts steady, steps light. The catch was never celebrated loudly. It was simply accepted, another gift from the earth, earned with stillness and care. In the open plains where grass waved like an endless sea beneath the sun, hunting took a different form. There, The air itself seemed to hum with the movement of the great buffalo herds, dark, breathing clouds that rolled across the horizon. The hunters of the plains crafted spears with long wooden shafts, balanced by the weight of stone and bone. They moved as a single body, guiding the herds toward cliffs or natural enclosures, their timing measured by the rhythm of the wind. Before the coming of the horse, the hunts were long and grueling. Men and women ran for hours, feet pounding the earth in unison, driving the great animals towards their fate. It was not a chase of cruelty, but of necessity, an ancient pact between hunger and gratitude. In time, when horses came to the plains, brought across the vast ocean from a distant world, the rhythm of the hunt changed. The people learned to ride with grace and precision, their bodies moving as one with the animal beneath them. On horseback, they could ride alongside the thunder of the buffalo herds, loosing arrows with perfect calm in the midst of chaos. Each shot was a heartbeat, each kill a vow fulfilled. In the forests of the east, where the canopy dimmed the light and silence ruled, hunters used the bow with reverent patience. They covered their bodies in mud, crushed pine needles into their skin, masking their scent with the breath of the forest itself. Hours passed like lifetimes as they waited in the stillness, every muscle quiet, every breath measured. When a deer stepped softly through the ferns, the arrow's release was barely heard, just the whisper of the bowstring and the quiet return of balance between hunter and hunted. Farther north, where ice ruled the land, hunters used spears and harpoons to strike seals at breathing holes carved in the frozen sea. They stood unmoving in the cold for hours, guided only by instinct and the rhythm of the animal below. In the brief silence between breaths, they struck. One motion, swift and sure, a partnership older than speech. To the west, along the endless rivers and mist-covered coasts, the people turned to the waters for sustenance. They built nets from woven fibers, baskets that caught salmon on their journey upstream. Their canoes, carved from single cedar logs, glided through fog like shadows. With spears tipped in bone and antler, they struck the surface of the water, guided not by sight, but by knowing. When the fish came, the people thanked the river, promising not to take more than it could give. Across deserts, mountains, forests, and frozen tundra, every tool carried a piece of the earth's soul. Every stone blade, every bowstring, every feather was bound by the same purpose, to preserve the fragile balance between life and survival. At the end of each hunt, tools were cleaned and set aside carefully, their edges wrapped in hide, their shafts laid beneath woven mats. Some were buried when broken, returned to the soil as gifts, for the people believed that everything that came from the earth must someday go back to it, that even the tools of survival were part of the great circle. When night came and the fires flickered low, hunters rested beside the quiet glow, their hands still marked with the dust of stone and the scent of wood smoke. Around them, the world exhaled. The stars shimmered above like scattered embers, and the forest spoke in sighs and whispers. In that stillness, the tools of the hunt, the blades, the bows, the arrows, rested not as weapons of war, but as instruments of harmony. They were born from reverence, shaped by patience, and guided by the eternal rhythm that tied humankind to the living earth. And so, the hunters slept, surrounded by the tools of their craft, listening to the heartbeat of the land, that had sustained them since the dawn of time. The morning rises slowly over the ancient land. Mists unravel from the valleys, drifting like breath across rivers and meadows. In this quiet hour, before the light has gathered its full strength, the world belongs to the hunters. Every sound matters. The tremor of a leaf, the distant cry of a bird, the sigh of wind through pine. The land itself seems to listen, waiting for the first step of the day's pursuit. The people knew that no hunt was ever the same. The way of the deer, the elk, the buffalo, the rabbit, or the fish, each required its own rhythm, its own knowledge of movement and silence. To hunt was to think like the creature itself, to feel what it felt, to breathe as it breathed. The hunter who wished to catch must first become unseen, unbound from the noise of thought, moving as softly as dust in sunlight. In the dense forests of the east, the hunters of the Iroquois and the Algonquin moved among towering trees, their steps cushioned by fallen leaves. The air there was heavy with scent, wet bark, moss, the faint sweetness of wild berries crushed underfoot. They hunted white-tailed deer, bear, and turkey, watching for the faintest flicker of motion between the trees. Sometimes they would use the call of the animal itself, mimicking the gentle bleat of a fawn or the rustle of wings in brush, coaxing curiosity rather than fear. Their hunts were long and patient, often taking days. When snow came, they followed the trails of deer by the marks left upon the white earth, reading not only where the creature had gone, but when it had rested, when it had paused to feed, when it had begun to tire. They moved in rhythm with that trail, never faster, never slower, until the perfect moment appeared, a clearing, a line of sight, a quiet wind. And when the arrow finally flew, it carried with it not haste, but deep respect. In the open grasslands of the plains, where the horizon seemed endless, the hunt became an act of thunder and grace. The buffalo were the lifeblood of the people, their hides used for homes, their bones for tools, their meat for sustenance. When the herds began to move, the earth itself seemed to tremble beneath their feet. The hunters watched them from a distance, learning their patterns, their crossings, their times of rest. Before the horse, the people hunted on foot, working together as one. They built long lines of stone and brush, leading towards steep cliffs, places later called buffalo jumps. Hidden behind ridges, they would wait for the wind to shift. When the moment came, they moved with precision, their shouts echoing across the plains. The great herds surged forward, driven by instinct and fear, until the earth opened beneath them. The hunt was swift, immense, and sacred. Afterward, the people gave thanks. Every part of the buffalo was used: hide, bone, horn, and sinew. Fires were lit, prayers were whispered into the wind, and songs rose into the fading day. The hunt was not a triumph, but a ceremony, a reminder of how deeply life and death were bound together. With the coming of the horse, a new rhythm took shape. The hunters became riders, swift as the wind itself. They painted their faces with the colors of the earth, tied feathers into their hair, and rode bareback, bow in hand, their bodies moving in harmony with their mounts. The arrow was loosed at full gallop, never breaking stride, guided by skill and instinct born from generations. The bond between horse and rider became a sacred unity. Two spirits joined in the eternal chase. To the north, where the world turned colder, hunters followed the migrations of caribou and moose. The tundra was vast and silent, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their feet. They built blinds of stone where they waited in the endless light of summer or the dim half-glow of winter. The caribou came in rivers of movement, thousands flowing across the frozen earth. The hunters used spears tipped with bone, striking when the herds passed closest. Further still, along the ice and sea, the Inuit stood beside holes cut into the frozen surface, their bodies still against the wind. The hunt there was one of endurance, hours of silence, eyes fixed on a single opening in the ice. When the seal surfaced to breathe, the spear moved faster than thought, guided by generations of practice. The cold bit into the skin, but the hunter did not shiver. He was part of the frozen world, patient and calm. In the deserts and canyons of the southwest, where heat shimmered like a veil, the hunt was a game of shadows. The people there, the Hopi, the Apache, the Pueblo, tracked small animals and deer through dust and stone. They learned to follow signs invisible to most. A faint scrape on a rock, a pattern of disturbed sand, a scent carried by the wind. Their bows were short, their arrows light, built for quickness and precision. The hunt was quiet, measured by thirst and sunlight. In those same lands, the rabbit hunt was a time of gathering. Whole communities moved together, spreading wide across the desert plain. With woven nets and careful steps, they herded the rabbits inward, closing the circle until the creatures had nowhere left to run. It was a hunt of rhythm, a movement as old as song, performed not in haste, but in unity. Far to the west, where forests met the sea, the coastal tribes hunted the life of the waters. Their canoes, carved from single cedar logs, cut through fog and waves alike. They followed the migrations of salmon and seal, watched the rise of the tide, and spoke to the ocean as one would to an elder. When a whale was taken, it was treated with ceremony and awe. Songs were sung before and after the hunt, honoring the spirit of the great creature. The people believed that if the whale's spirit was respected, it would guide its kin back again. Each region, each people, carried their own methods, yet all shared a single truth, that to hunt was to belong. The hunter was never separate from the world he pursued. He did not walk above it, but within it. Every trail, every arrow, every breath of wind was a reminder that life depended on balance, not conquest. When the hunts were over, the world returned to silence. Fires burned low in the evening light. Smoke rose gently through the trees, curling into the dusk. Children listened to the elders' voices, low, steady, filled with memory, as stories of ancient hunts drifted into the night. The scent of roasted meat and pine mixed in the cool air, and the land, once more, felt whole. The tools were cleaned, the boughs unstrung. The people rested beside their fires, knowing that the earth had given once again. In the quiet beyond the hunt, gratitude settled like dew upon the ground. The stars glimmered above the sleeping plains, above the forests and frozen seas, eternal witnesses to the dance between hunger and harmony. And somewhere in the distance, the cry of a lone wolf echoed across the valley, a sound as old as time, a reminder that the spirit of the hunt never ends. When the chase had ended and the arrows had found their mark, the land returned to silence. The thunder of hooves faded, the echo of shouts dissolved into the air, and only the slow rhythm of breathing remained, the breath of the earth itself and of those who lived upon it. For the hunters, the moment after the kill was never one of celebration, but of reverence. The ground beneath them held the stillness of both gratitude and sorrow, a quiet recognition that life had been taken so that life might continue. The hunter knelt beside the fallen creature, placed a hand upon its side, and whispered thanks in his heart, not words, but feeling, carried in the stillness between heartbeats. The hunt was over, but the work had only begun. Under the open sky, the people gathered to prepare what the earth had given. The meat was cut with careful hands, each motion deliberate, each part respected. Nothing was wasted, for to waste was to break the balance of the world. The bones were cleaned and set aside, later to be shaped into needles, scrapers, fish hooks, and awls. The hide was stretched and dried beneath the sun, becoming clothing, shelter, and drumskin. Even the sinew and fat were preserved, transformed into cord, glue, or fuel for the fire. In this way, the animal did not die in vain. Its spirit lived on in every tool, every meal, every sound that rose from the camp. The people did not see themselves as above the creature, but as part of its continuation. Fires were built high, their smoke rising into the vastness of evening. Over glowing embers, the first strips of meat were roasted, the scent drifting through the air like prayer. Those who had stayed behind, the elders, the children, the mothers, waited with quiet patience, their faces illuminated by the flicker of light. When the hunters returned, there were no shouts of triumph, only calm smiles, nods of understanding, and the soft murmur of thanks. Before the food was eaten, a small piece was always offered back to the land. It was placed upon the earth or left upon a rock, a gesture of remembrance, a way of saying that the people took only what they needed and returned the rest to the circle of life. In some places, they sprinkled bits of fat into the fire, letting the smoke carry their gratitude to the sky. In others, they poured water upon the ground, a drink for the spirits who had guided the hunt. As the night deepened, the camp filled with the slow rhythm of work. The meat was sliced into long, thin pieces and hung upon racks of willow or aspen. In the dry wind of the plains, it hardened into jerky, light, portable, and long-lasting. In colder regions, meat was frozen against the chill, stored in pits lined with moss and ice. In the warm lands of the south, it was smoked above low fires, the scent of wood and ash sealing its strength within. The women worked beside the men, their hands swift and sure. They crushed berries to mix with dried meat and fat, creating pemmican, a dense, nourishing food that could last through the leanest months. Children gathered herbs and leaves, filling woven baskets with flavors of the earth, sage, mint, wild onion, that would season the meals of the coming days. The village became a living rhythm, the scraping of hides, the soft crackle of fire, the murmur of stories rising like smoke into the starlit night. Elders told of hunts long past, of times when mammoths walked the plains and rivers ran thick with salmon. Their voices carried wisdom, not as commands, but as echoes of memory. To preserve the hides, they were rubbed with the animal's own fat and brains, stretched between poles, and softened by hand until supple as cloth. Later, they would become moccasins, robes, and coverings for the teepees and lodges that sheltered the people from wind and rain. The smell of curing hides mingled with the scent of pine smoke and earth, a perfume of survival that drifted across generations. Every task was shared. Children fetched water from the stream, elders oversaw the smoking fires, Hunters sharpened their blades and repaired their arrows, knowing that another hunt would come soon, perhaps in days, perhaps in weeks. The cycle was endless, but never tiresome. It was the heartbeat of existence. Give, take, give again. In the far north, where the night stretched into near endless darkness, the people built caches high above the snow. Meat was hung in frozen slabs from wooden poles, safe from the reach of wolves and foxes. Fish were dried into thin sheets, their silver scales glimmering in the light of the aurora that danced overhead. Beneath the shimmering sky, the land itself seemed alive, breathing in slow, patient time with those who dwelled upon it. Along the rivers of the northwest, great racks of salmon glistened in the sunlight, drying in rows that swayed gently in the wind. The air was filled with the fragrance of smoke and salt water, the murmur of waves, and the distant cry of gulls. Families worked together in silence, each movement practiced, each task known since childhood. The process was not labor, it was tradition, repeated for centuries without change, bound to the rhythm of the returning fish. In the plains, the people stored dried meat in leather bags, sealed with fat to keep out moisture. Some was hung inside teepees, near the warmth of the hearth. Some was buried in cool, dry earth, hidden beneath stones to keep until winter. Every act of preservation carried foresight, not fear of scarcity, but wisdom born from respect for the seasons. When the day's work was done, the people gathered once more around the central fire. Sparks lifted into the night air, glowing like stars that had come down to rest for a while among them. The warmth of the flame softened the chill that crept from the edges of the dark. There were songs then, slow, rhythmic songs that told of the hunt, of the animals, of gratitude to the earth. The voices blended with the low hum of the wind, carrying the sound far across the plains, through the forest, and over the mountains. Even the land seemed to listen. As the fire burned low, the people drifted into rest. The smoke curled gently upward, carrying with it the essence of cedar and sage. The stars shimmered above, ancient and watchful. The hunters slept, knowing that their work was done, that balance had been maintained. In the stillness of night, the land breathed once more, calm, whole, and eternal. The hunt had given life, and life had given back. The world was in harmony again. When dawn rose again over the horizon, the land was silent, breathing in the cool mist of morning. A thin layer of fog drifted over the valleys, veiling the rivers and meadows in silver light. The earth exhaled, and with that breath came renewal, the quiet turning of the endless circle that had no beginning and no end. For the native peoples, hunting was never a mere act of survival. It was a ceremony, one that joined the hunter, the animal, and the earth in a single, sacred rhythm. To take life was not conquest. It was communion. The hunter walked not as a master of the wild, but as a part of it. His feet pressed gently into the soil, knowing that each step left a mark, not just upon the ground, but upon the balance of all things. The bow in his hands was not a weapon. It was an instrument of harmony, carved from the living body of the tree, strung with the sinew of the creature that had already given itself. Every arrow carried not just flight, but prayer. When he drew the string, the hunter's mind was still, his breath one with the wind. In that moment, time slowed, and the distance between life and death dissolved into a single heartbeat. The animal too seemed to understand. It did not flee in fear. but moved with grace, as if the world itself had already chosen what must be. This understanding was ancient. It stretched back through uncounted generations, through mammoth hunts upon frozen plains, through forests where giant elk roamed, through rivers so rich with fish that one could catch them by hand. Each generation passed its knowing to the next, not in books or symbols, but in stories, songs, and lived example. Around the fire, those stories became the heartbeat of the people. They told of how the buffalo once offered itself freely to the plains tribes, saying, "Take from me only what you need, and I shall return." They spoke of how the salmon promised the river people its body each season, so long as they honored its journey upstream. They told of the deer who knelt to the hunter in dreams, asking only that the hunter remember its spirit when the snows came. To hunt was to listen, to walk the forest, the prairie, the tundra, and to hear the unspoken language of the world. The rustle of grass, the ripple of water, the whisper of wind through pine, all were part of a vast, living voice. The people moved with that voice, not against it. Each tribe held its own rituals of gratitude. Some painted symbols upon their faces, circles for the sun, lines for the rivers, dots for the stars, believing that such marks connected them to all living things. Some fasted before the hunt, cleansing the body and the spirit. Others offered tobacco, corn, or the first sip of water to the four directions, north, south, east, and west, asking permission to enter the sacred. Among the plains people, when the buffalo fell, its head was turned toward the rising sun, a gesture of respect for the life that had sustained the tribe. Among the northern tribes, the bones of hunted animals were placed back into the water so their spirits might be reborn. In the forests, hunters tied feathers or bits of cloth to trees as tokens of thanks. Everywhere, in all lands, gratitude was the first and last act of the hunt. For them, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was thin, a shimmering veil, like mist rising from a morning river. To touch the world with respect was to touch the divine. In the heart of the village, the elders often reminded the young ones, "We do not own the land, we belong to it." The rivers were not theirs to control, but to care for. The animals were not theirs to command, but to understand. Even the smallest bird carried a lesson, a reminder that every life, no matter how brief, had purpose. The way of the hunt was the way of balance. If one took too much, the land would grow silent. If one forgot to give thanks, the seasons would withhold their gifts. But when one walked in harmony, the earth responded with abundance. Berries ripened, rivers filled, herds returned. As years passed, the tools of hunting changed, from spears to bows, from bows to traps, and later to rifles. Yet among many, the spirit remained the same. They still whispered prayers before the shot, still knelt beside the fallen, still thanked the earth for its generosity. Even today, when the descendants of those first hunters walk the old trails, they feel that same connection. The pulse of the land is still there, deep, steady, and timeless. The wind still carries the scent of cedar and smoke. The rivers still sing the same songs. And in the call of the hawk, or the cry of the coyote at dusk, the voice of the ancestors can still be heard. For in every hunt, in every meal shared, in every act of gratitude, the old ways live on. The people knew. To survive was to remember. To live well was to honor. To hunt with respect was to keep the world in balance. As the stars rise and night folds across the land, their wisdom lingers like the fading smoke of an old campfire. The earth sleeps, but never forgets. The spirits of the animals drift among the trees, across the plains, through the mountains and the rivers, their presence felt, their memory eternal. And somewhere, in the quiet hours before dawn, the echo of a hunter's prayer still moves through the wind. Thank you, Earth. Thank you, life. Thank you for the circle that never ends. The world turned slowly beneath the wide skies of the old land. Each season arrived not as a change, but as a breath. Soft, deliberate, infinite. The hunters moved with those breaths, their lives entwined with the pulse of the earth. In the green awakening of spring, when the rivers overflowed and the buds of cottonwood glimmered like tiny stars upon their branches, the people began their renewal. They gathered from their winter lodges, shaking free the silence of the cold months. Snow melted from the mountains, carrying silt and memory into the low valleys where fresh grass rose for the first deer. It was the time of small hunts, the taking of rabbits and birds, the fishing of swollen streams. Children followed the elders, learning to read the world once more, how to find the trails of elk in damp soil, how to spot the shimmer of fish beneath the shadows of the water, how to know when a bird's call meant calm and when it meant warning. Hunting was a teacher, and the land was its language. Every gust of wind wrote its own lesson. The hunters watched how seeds moved across the plains, how the wind bent the reeds, and they knew which direction the herds would take. Nothing was random. Everything spoke. When summer came, the land grew full with promise. Berries darkened in the sun, rivers warmed, and game became plentiful. It was the time of abundance and preparation. The hunters traveled farther now, often for weeks, seeking the larger animals whose lives sustained entire communities. On the Great Plains, the horizon shimmered like a sea. There, under the blinding sun, bison grazed in endless herds. Their heavy heads moved through the tall grass like dark waves in golden light. The hunters watched them from afar, reading their movements, the way they clustered when restless, the way the calves trailed the mothers, the way a single bull lifted its nose to the wind to test for danger. The people built windbreaks from brush and rock and waited for the moment when the air was right, when the herd's path would curve just close enough to the trap or to the cliff that waited, silent and ancient, as if it too understood its place in the ritual. The buffalo jumps were sacred grounds. They were places where courage and gratitude met. Drummers waited below, their low rhythms merging with the heartbeat of the land. And when the moment came, the hunters moved, their feet pounding the earth, their cries rising into the hot sky, driving the herd forward, not with cruelty, but with the urgency of survival. When the ground thundered and the air filled with dust, the hunters knew life and death were crossing paths again, and in that crossing, the circle of balance would remain whole. When the work was done, the people gathered in silence. The fallen buffalo were treated with ceremony. The hides were stretched and tanned under the sun, the bones carved into tools, the sinew dried for bowstrings, and the meat cut thin to become pemmican, food for the long winters ahead. Nothing was wasted, because nothing was ever owned. Far to the north, the seasons turned differently. The people of the frozen lands waited for the caribou, the restless, tireless wanderers of the tundra. Their migrations were vast, stretching beyond the eye's reach, and the hunters followed them across snowfields and ice-blown rivers. They moved silently, wrapped in furs, their breath white against the wind. Each step across the frozen crust was measured. Each movement, a whisper in a world that punished noise. They carried spears with barbed bone tips and sleds carved from driftwood washed ashore by storms long forgotten. To hunt in this place was not a choice, but a pact, to survive in harmony with a land that gave only to those who respected its silence. When the caribou fell, the hunters sang softly into the wind. The sound was carried across the snow, disappearing into the horizon as if offering the spirit of the animal back to the world that had given it form. Autumn came like fire. Leaves turned to flame, rivers cooled, and birds gathered in clouds across the sky. It was the time of final hunts, of preparing for the long sleep of winter, when food would be stored, tools repaired, and stories told beside slow-burning fires. The people understood the rhythm of this endless turning. They did not rush it. They did not command it. They moved with it, their hearts as constant as the stars that guided their ancestors. Winter was not an ending, but a stillness, a breath held by the world before the cycle began again. And so, in that stillness, they remembered the deer that had fed them, the buffalo that had clothed them, the fish that had filled their nets, and the earth that had held them all. Through each season, the hunt was never separate from life itself. It was life, unfolding, teaching, and reminding. The people did not take from the earth. They borrowed, knowing they would one day return what they had been given. Before the first path was taken through the tall grass, before the first arrow left the bowstring, the true hunt began within the spirit. For the native peoples, hunting was a sacred exchange, and the heart of that exchange was balance. It was not the body that first prepared for the hunt, but the soul. In the quiet days before the journey, the hunter withdrew from the world. He left behind the comfort of the fires and the murmur of familiar voices. He walked into solitude, into the forests, the cliffs, the starlit valleys where silence spoke with the voice of the earth. There, far from the noise of living, the spirit opened. The body was emptied through fasting. The mind was cleansed by stillness. Sleep came and went in fragments, replaced by dreams that shimmered like reflections on moving water. In those dreams, symbols rose. Animals, winds, storms, rivers. They came not as visions of conquest, but as whispers of guidance, gentle reminders that the hunter's place was never above the world, but within it. When dawn came to the high places, the air was thin and sharp with meaning. The hunter's breath mingled with the mist that clung to the ground. All around, the land waited, patient, ancient, alive. In the slow movement of light through the trees, in the drift of smoke from a distant fire, in the trembling of dew on a blade of grass, everything spoke the same truth. All life was connected. The preparation of the spirit was an act of remembrance. The hunter remembered the old stories, the times when the first people learned that the world was a circle, and that every life, every breath, returned to its beginning. To hunt was not to break that circle, but to enter it. When he returned to his people, the hunter carried with him a new stillness. His eyes held the light of mountains and the quiet of water. The others could see it, the balance that comes from having stood between the worlds of seen and unseen. They knew he was ready, not because his hands were strong, but because his heart had become as clear as the river's surface. At dawn, smoke rose from the center of the village. It curled through the air in slow spirals, carrying the scent of sage and cedar. The hunters gathered around it, not in words, but in silence. The fire burned not for warmth, but for memory. Its flames reached upward, thin and steady, joining earth to sky. The rising smoke carried gratitude for the sun, for the wind, for the unseen guardians that moved through every living thing. The air shimmered faintly, as if it too understood the ceremony unfolding beneath it. Feet pressed lightly into the ground, and the soil accepted the weight as though it were part of its own heartbeat. Each hunter became one with the moment, a living thread in the tapestry of the land. In stillness, their presence dissolved into the breath of the morning. The cries of distant birds faded. Even the insects seemed to pause. It was as though the world held itself in balance, waiting for the first step. The faces of the hunters were marked with earth, lines and circles drawn from clay and ash. These were not symbols of power, but of belonging. They reminded the hunter that he was made of the same dust as the deer, the wolf, the bison, and the crow. His life and theirs were one and the same, borrowed from the same soil, destined to return to it. When they moved into the wild, they did not break the silence. Their steps were slow, their breath measured. Each movement was deliberate, in rhythm with the sway of the trees, the roll of clouds, the drifting of wind through grass. The world around them seemed to shift, not as background, but as partner. The land guided, the wind carried, the animals watched. No word was spoken, yet everything was understood. The hunter's awareness spread outward, like ripples in still water. They felt the weight of air, the tension of the earth beneath their feet, the faint vibration that told of movement far away, the whisper of life unfolding. This was the sacred beginning of every hunt. It was not marked by noise or haste, but by the merging of spirit and world. In that stillness, the hunter ceased to be separate from what he sought. He became part of the living pattern, breathing in rhythm with all that surrounded him. Every rustle of leaf, every bend of grass, every distant sound became a message, a language older than time. The world was alive and it was listening, and in its listening, it welcomed the hunter, not as a conqueror, but as a keeper of the balance. Across the great expanse of the ancient continent, from the whispering pines of the eastern forests to the blazing deserts of the southwest, from the windswept plains to the icy reaches of the north, the way of the hunt changed with the land itself. Every place breathed its own lessons, its own silences, its own kind of patience. In the deep forests of the eastern woodlands, where the canopy thickened into green shadow and the air carried the scent of moss and water, the hunt was a quiet art. Light filtered through the leaves in trembling gold, touching the undergrowth where deer moved like ghosts. Here hunting was an act of invisibility. The people learned to move as softly as the wind. Their moccasins left only whispers upon the soil, their breath hidden in the rhythm of the forest. They knew every sound, the fall of a leaf, the warning cry of a jay, the faint crack of a twig beneath a paw. To hunt in the forest was to become the forest itself. Boughs were small and strong, built to move easily between the trees. Arrows, fletched with feathers of wild turkey, flew straight and silent through narrow spaces. Sometimes hunters crafted masks of deer heads and draped themselves in skins, blending with the herds that grazed among the maples and oaks. They watched, waited, and followed, never rushing, never forcing the moment. At night, the forest changed. The calls of owls echoed above dark waters. Fires glowed softly through the trees, and smoke curled upward like prayers into the cold sky. The hunters rested, listening to the world breathe around them, the chorus of frogs, the murmur of rivers, the endless heartbeat of the woods. To the south and west, where the earth opened into vast grasslands, the world became motion and light. Here the hunt was not hidden in the shadows, it moved across the open, carried by the thunder of hooves. The plains stretched out beneath the endless blue of the sky, and across them roamed the buffalo, the great ones, the moving nations of the earth. The people of the plains lived in rhythm with the herds. Their lives, their movements, their stories followed the migrations as faithfully as the moon follows the tide. They built their homes where the grass grew tall and the rivers bent gently through the land. When the time came, they rode out, men and women both, their bodies one with their horses, their hearts steady with purpose. Before the horse, the hunters drove buffalo toward cliffs or into corrals built from stone and branches. After the horse, the hunt became a dance of precision, riders moving as swiftly as wind, their arrows released from full gallop, their aim guided by instinct older than memory. When the hunt ended, the plain lay still, dust hung in the air, golden in the sun. The people dismounted in silence. They placed their hands upon the fallen animals, not in triumph, but in gratitude. Every hide, every bone, every drop of fat and marrow was part of life's circle. The meat fed the tribe. The hides became lodges and robes. The bones became tools and art. The sinew, strong and fine, became the cords of new bows, ensuring that the spirit of the hunt would live on in the next generation. Farther west, the earth changed again. Stone replaced soil, and rivers carved deep canyons through the red rock. Here, in the deserts and mesas, the people of the arid lands learned to listen to silence itself. The heat shimmered across the ground, and life clung to every drop of water. The hunt was not a daily act, but a rare and patient pursuit. In the early dawn, when the air was still cool and the shadows long, hunters tracked rabbits, lizards, and antelope across the dry valleys. They learned to read the faintest prints upon the sand, a displaced pebble, a bent blade of grass, a pattern of wind upon dust. Their bows were shorter, their arrows lighter, their endurance unmatched beneath the endless sun. They wove traps from yucca and agave fibers, dug hidden pits, and set snares along dry washes where animals came to drink at dusk. Every movement, every choice was measured against the cost of thirst and heat. The desert gave little, but what it gave was precious. And so, gratitude here was deeper, quieter, spoken through ritual and song, carried in the rhythm of drums that echoed off the canyon walls. At night, stars spilled across the black sky in uncountable thousands. The hunters lay upon the warm stone, their eyes tracing constellations that told of old hunts, of coyote and bear, of the first fires and the first bowstrings. To the north, where cold ruled and light came only in brief glimmers, the hunt was shaped by endurance. The tundra stretched wide and pale beneath an unending sky. The people moved with the caribou, following the herds across frozen rivers and windswept plains. The world here was made of quiet and distance, snow, stone, and the slow rhythm of survival. Hunting in the north was a test of patience and respect. Each breath was visible in the air, each sound carried far across the frozen silence. Hunters learned to walk with the snow, to wait hours beside ice holes for seals, to follow tracks that vanished with every gust of wind. They built tools from the land itself, harpoons tipped with bone, sleds carved from driftwood, lines braided from sinew. Their clothing was a part of their understanding. Furs and hides sewn with care, layered for warmth, shaped for movement. When they hunted, they carried not just their tools, but the knowledge of centuries, a memory carved into instinct. Along the coasts, the sea became the great provider. The people paddled slender canoes across misty waters, their movements silent as the tides. They hunted whales, seals, and salmon, creatures of vast strength and mystery. The ocean was their forest, their plain, their lifeline. They watched the movement of birds to know where the fish gathered, the colour of the clouds to tell when storms were near. When they brought their catch ashore, they thanked the water, sprinkling handfuls of fish oil or crushed shell back into the waves. The sea, too, had a spirit, deep, ancient, and alive. Each landscape carried its own rhythm. Each tribe moved in harmony with its land. The tools differed, the seasons shifted, but the essence of the hunt was always the same: to walk with humility, to listen before acting, to take only what was needed, and to give back in gratitude. As the centuries passed, the methods changed, yet the memory of those old ways never faded. The trails they walked remain beneath the forests. The echoes of their songs still drift across the plains, and the spirits of the hunted still move through the rivers, the wind, and the stars. The land remembers, and in its remembering, the story continues. The eternal dialogue between the hunter and the hunted, between hunger and harmony, between the earth and the life it sustains. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the horizon was only a thin line of grey light, the hunters rose. The world still slept. Only the faint sigh of wind moved through the trees or the grass. In that fragile silence, they prepared not only their tools, but their spirit. For the hunt in all its forms was never a thing of chance or mere necessity. It was an offering, a conversation with the living world. Before they stepped into the forest or out onto the plains, the hunters knelt upon the earth. They placed their hands upon the soil, feeling the cool pulse beneath their palms. They whispered prayers, not of asking, but of balance. They called to the Great Spirit, to the guardians of the four directions, to the east for renewal, to the south for growth, to the west for reflection, and to the north for endurance. They spoke to the animals in spirit, not as prey, but as kin. To hunt was not to conquer. It was to enter into an ancient agreement, one written long before memory, between the beings who walked, swam, flew, and crawled, and those who sought them with purpose and gratitude. When the first steps were taken, the air seemed to listen. Every footfall mattered. Every breath joined the song of the earth, and in that song, the hunter's spirit moved, neither above nor below the creatures they followed, but alongside them, part of the same endless cycle of giving and receiving. In many tribes, the preparation for the hunt began with fasting. The hunters cleansed their bodies of excess and their minds of noise. They bathed in rivers or streams, letting the water wash away the weight of distraction. Smoke from sage or cedar drifted around them, carrying prayers to the unseen world. The heart had to be still before the body could move. Only then could one listen, truly listen, to the voices of the land. When the hunt began, the earth itself became a teacher. A single broken twig spoke of direction. The faintest ripple on water revealed movement. The smell of crushed leaves, the angle of sunlight upon a track, even the silence of birds, all were signs, messages left by nature for those who had learned her language. To the untrained eye, the forest seemed random, but to the hunter, it was a map drawn in breath and motion. A bent reed might speak of deer passing at dawn. A feather caught upon bark might whisper of a bird's nest nearby. Even the insects told stories. When they grew quiet, it meant a predator. When they hummed in rhythm, the forest was at peace. And when at last the animal appeared, a deer stepping between shafts of sunlight, a rabbit pausing among the ferns, a buffalo lifting its head in the wind, the hunter did not rush forward. They waited, they breathed, they watched until their heart matched the rhythm of the earth beneath them. In that stillness, there was understanding that every life, great or small, had meaning beyond hunger. When the arrow flew, when the spear struck true, the hunter gave thanks before the next breath was taken. They placed tobacco or sage beside the fallen being, a gift of spirit for the spirit that had given itself. Sometimes the hunters sang, low, wordless songs that carried through the trees, songs of gratitude, of mourning, of connection. Each note rose to the sky, each echo folded into the memory of the land. It was said that the animals heard these songs even after death, that their spirits carried the melody into the next world, guiding them home. The people knew that nothing taken was ever truly gone. The animal spirit lingered in the tribe, in the food that nourished, in the tools that protected, in the stories that were told beside the fire. Children learned that when they wore the hide of a deer or the feather of a hawk, they carried the wisdom of that creature. To wear it was not vanity, it was remembrance. In winter gatherings, elders spoke of hunts from long ago. Their voices, slow and deep, carried through the smoke of burning pine. They told of the first hunters who learned from the wolf, who watched how it moved in silence, how it worked with the pack, how it respected the hunt as sacred work. They told of the eagle, who never took what it could not carry, and the bear, who taught patience and timing. Each story was a lesson, each animal a teacher, each hunt a reflection of the great pattern that bound all life together. The children listened with wide eyes, feeling the weight of those lessons settle gently into their hearts. They learned that a hunter was not measured by how many animals they took, but by how deeply they understood the world they walked through. To hunt with respect was to live in balance, to honor both life and death, to keep the wheel of the world turning in harmony. As the fire burned low and the night deepened, the sound of drums would rise, slow, steady, like the beating of a heart. Men and women alike would move around the flames, their shadows flickering against the earth walls of the lodge. This was the dance of gratitude, a prayer in motion, a memory of every hunt that had ever given life to the people. The rhythm echoed through the night, through time itself, through the soil where bones lay and seeds waited. It said what words could not, that all things were one, that every life fed another, that the hunter and the hunted were not opposites, but mirrors of the same truth. When morning came and the fire turned to pale ash, the people looked to the horizon and saw not conquest, but continuity. The hunt would begin again, not for glory, not for power, but because the world asked it to, and the people listened. Time, for the native peoples, was not counted in hours or days. It was felt in the turning of the world, in the slow breath of seasons that shaped every hunt, every gathering, every rhythm of life. Each season carried its own song, its own offering, its own lessons whispered by the earth. In the early spring, when the ice loosened its hold and rivers began to move again, the world woke in trembling green. Snow melted into the soil, and the smell of wet earth returned, a scent of rebirth, of quiet anticipation. The hunters watched the rivers closely. Fish began their ancient journey upstream, silver bodies flashing through cold waters. This was the time of nets and spears, of patient waiting at the edge of currents that had known the same motion for centuries. Canoes, carved from birch and cedar, slipped silently across the mirrored surface. Men and women alike leaned forward, eyes following the flow, hands ready to strike when the shadows moved beneath the water. Each fish that was taken was honored, its bones cleaned with care, its oil saved for lamps, its skin tanned for use. Nothing was wasted, for in the season of renewal, waste was seen as forgetting gratitude. When the first hunts of spring were complete, the people gathered. They sang songs of the returning light, thanked the waters for their generosity, and placed the first catch upon an altar of stone, a gift to the spirits of river and sky. It was said that without this offering, the fish might not return the next year. Balance had to be maintained, even in abundance. As spring deepened into summer, the forests grew thick and full. The plains shimmered under a wide, hot sky, and the animals grew strong again after the long hunger of winter. This was a time of great hunts. Deer moved in herds through the green woodlands. Buffalo thundered across the prairie in dark, rippling waves. Elk called from the mountain valleys where wildflowers bloomed. The people followed, not out of need alone, but because the hunt itself was a continuation of the story of creation, a reminder that life and death walked always side by side, each nourishing the other. Hunters traveled for days, following tracks that led through deep grass and open sky. When the hunt was done, the camp became a place of labor and reverence. The air filled with the scent of smoke and hide, of drying meat and fresh tallow. Women scraped and softened the hides, stretching them beneath the sun until they became supple and strong. Children helped gather herbs and roots for curing and cooking. Even the elders came forward, their songs guiding the rhythm of work, their stories weaving memory into the act of survival. At night, as fires burned low, the village would hum with quiet satisfaction. The stars above were bright and near, and many said that the ancestors watched from those lights, smiling upon the living, pleased that the old ways continued still. Autumn arrived with a different kind of beauty. The air turned crisp, the colours deepened into fire and gold. It was the season of preparation, the gathering of strength before the silence of winter. Hunting became both ritual and necessity now. Every tribe knew that what they stored would carry them through the long, cold months ahead. Great journeys began. Men set out in groups, travelling to known hunting grounds. They read the winds and clouds, their every sense tuned to the voice of the land. When the herds were found, The people moved with grace and precision. Traps were set, calls were mimicked, and arrows were loosed with reverence. When the hunt ended, a hush always followed. A deep, reflective silence that honoured what had been given. Back in the villages, fires burned through the evenings. The smell of drying meat mixed with the sweet smoke of sage and cedar. The people worked together, cutting, drying, smoking, storing, turning the gifts of the hunt into sustenance for the coming cold. Food was not simply kept, it was blessed. The first bite of every meal that winter would be offered to the fire, a gesture of remembrance, a promise of gratitude renewed. Winter descended like a dream, soft, pale, and unyielding. The world slowed, the rivers hardened into mirrors of stone, the trees whispered under the weight of snow. It was a time not of hunting, but of storytelling, crafting, and reflection. Inside the lodges, warmth gathered from the fires and the shared closeness of the tribe. The hunts of the past were remembered, their lessons retold through the low voices of the elders. Children listened as they mended nets or shaped new arrowheads, each word carrying the quiet power of generations. In those stories lived the rules of the hunt: respect the giver, waste nothing, walk lightly, and never forget that the earth is alive. Even when storms howled and darkness lingered, the people did not see the world as cruel. They saw balance, the deep rhythm of rest after abundance, the pause before the renewal of spring. They trusted that the cycle would begin again, as it always had, as it always would. And when the first thaw came once more, when the rivers cracked open and the geese returned to the skies, the hunters would again prepare their bows, again whisper their prayers, again step out into the vastness of the land with open hearts. The seasons were not obstacles to be endured, but teachings to be understood. Each one offered a lesson. Spring taught patience and renewal. Summer taught strength and gratitude. Autumn taught preparation and humility. Winter taught endurance and faith. Together they formed the circle, the eternal cycle of taking and giving, of life feeding life, of earth and spirit, bound as one. In the world of the native peoples, the hunt was never an isolated act. It was not a task that began and ended with the taking of life. It was the living thread that wove through every aspect of existence, binding the people to the land to the animals, and all things together in a tapestry of gratitude and creation. Every hunt was a story, and every story became a lesson, passed from one generation to the next in words, in rhythm, in the quiet beauty of art. When hunters returned from the wild, their stories did not remain in silence. They were told beside fires, beneath the great dark of the night sky, their voices mingling with the crackle of flame and the whisper of wind. These stories were not of conquest, but of learning, of patience, respect, and humility. Each one carried the memory of an encounter, the path of a deer through morning mist, the sudden flight of geese across a lake, the sound of hooves echoing through an empty canyon. As the stories passed from voice to voice, they became part of the people's collective memory, a living library of wisdom kept not in books, but in hearts and songs. From those stories, art was born. On the smooth walls of caves and cliffs, hunters painted the shapes of animals they had followed and honoured. Buffalo painted in ochre and charcoal, elk drawn in flowing lines, bears and eagles rendered in graceful motion. Each mark was not decoration, but devotion, a way to give thanks, to remember, to speak to the spirits through colour and form. In the woodlands, carvings took shape from tree and bone. Totems rose high, their faces and forms telling of family lineage, of hunts that sustained the people, of spirits that guided their steps. A bear carved into wood did not represent power alone. It represented endurance, courage, and the gift of survival. A hawk's image stood for vision, for clarity and precision in the hunt and in life. The people wore their art as much as they created it. Feathers were woven into hair and clothing, not as ornament, but as remembrance, symbols of connection with the bird whose flight had taught them grace and perspective. Beads made from bone, shell, and stone carried the shapes of animals, each bead a small prayer, each necklace a quiet story resting against the skin. Drums, too, carried the echo of the hunt. Their deep rhythm mirrored the heartbeat of the earth, and their skins were often made from the hides of hunted animals, purified and blessed before being stretched across the wooden frames. When struck, they did not sing of death, but of life continuing, of the circle unbroken. The songs that rose from those drums spoke of movement and spirit. They told of the great herds across the plains, of the silent deer paths through forest glades, of the rivers flashing with fish beneath the sunlight. Each song was a ceremony, each rhythm a bridge between the people and the unseen. The voice of the drum was the voice of the hunt, steady, sacred, eternal. Even the tools of the hunt were crafted with reverence. A bow was not merely wood and sinew, it was the meeting of two spirits, tree and animal. Before shaping it, a hunter would thank the tree that offered its branch, the creature whose sinew would lend its strength, the fire that would harden its curve. Every arrow carried a part of the maker's heart. Feathers were chosen carefully, not for appearance, but for balance and spirit. A feather from an eagle might bring clarity, from a hawk, precision, from a crow, wisdom and foresight. The making of these tools was as sacred as the use of them. It was done in silence with steady breath, with the understanding that the hunt began not in the chase, but in the act of creation itself. When hunts succeeded, the celebration was not of pride, but of harmony. The tribe would gather, songs would rise, and dancers would circle the fire in slow, graceful motion, hands lifted to the sky, feet pressed to the soil, each movement connecting heaven and earth, spirit and flesh. Offerings were always made. The first piece of meat was placed in the fire, its smoke carrying thanks to the spirits above. Bones were laid carefully upon the ground, returned to the earth from which life had come. The people knew that nothing was truly theirs. Everything was borrowed, and every act of taking carried the duty of giving. Through these rituals, the young learned the essence of balance. They watched their elders with wide, silent eyes, absorbing each gesture, each prayer. They learned that the spirit of the hunt was not measured in trophies or numbers, but in the quiet dignity of respect, in how gently one moved through the world, in how fully one remembered that every living thing was sacred. As seasons passed into years and years into generations, the memory of countless hunts became the pulse of the culture itself. It shaped language, words for snow that told the hunter how it would sound underfoot, words for wind that revealed its direction and scent. It shaped ceremony, dances that told the story of the chase, chants that called the spirits of animals to bless the people's endurance. It shaped art, belief, and even the understanding of time, for the hunt was the measure of cycles, the reminder that life must always move forward, but never without remembering where it began. In the glow of evening, as the fires burned low and the stars turned slowly above the camps, the people sat in peace, their hearts full, their bellies nourished, their souls woven into the living memory of all that surrounded them. They did not see themselves as masters of nature, but as its children, caretakers of a gift far greater than themselves. To hunt was not to end a life, but to continue the story of life. A story older than words, older than time, written still upon the wind and the water, the mountain and the plain. Long before the hunt began, before the first bowstring was drawn, before the first track was seen, the journey started in dreams. In the quiet world between sleep and waking, the hunter listened for signs from the unseen, for in the old ways, dreams were not illusions, but messages, soft echoes from ancestors, guiding the living toward harmony with the world that breathes around them. When a young hunter dreamed of an animal, the elders gathered to listen. They would sit in silence as the dream was retold, their faces lit by the glow of the fire. Every detail mattered: the direction of the wind, the sound of water, the movement of wings, the glance of an eye. To dream of the deer was to be reminded of gentleness and awareness. To dream of the bear was to learn strength, solitude, and patience. To dream of the eagle was to see with clarity, to understand not only the hunt, but the heart of the hunter himself. The dream revealed what the day would bring. It was said that a true hunter hunted twice, first in the dream, then upon the earth. And if the spirit of the animal appeared there, speaking through symbol or silence, it was a blessing, a permission, an understanding that life would be given and received in balance. Before setting out, the hunter purified both body and spirit. He fasted for days, drinking only water, letting hunger sharpen his senses until the smallest sound carried meaning. He bathed in streams at dawn, the cold water biting against his skin, waking him to the presence of the world. He burned sage or sweet grass, letting the smoke rise around him in thin spirals, each wisp a prayer carried skyward. The hunt was not approached with eagerness or pride, but with quiet reverence, a step into a realm where all things were alive, all things aware. The stones beneath the feet, the wind upon the skin, the flight of ravens overhead, all spoke. To hear them was to know that the spirits walked beside you. Some tribes believed that each hunter carried a spirit guide, a totem that watched over their path. It might come in the form of a wolf, an eagle, a fox, or even a humble sparrow. The guide appeared in dreams or visions, offering wisdom through subtle signs, the way light fell through the trees, the sudden stillness of the air, the call of a bird from the direction of the rising sun. In the moment of the hunt, the boundary between worlds blurred. The hunter was no longer separate from the animal, but part of the same breath, the same life moving through two forms. When the arrow left the bow, it carried not only strength, but a prayer that the spirit of the animal find peace, that its gift be honored, that the cycle remain unbroken. After the hunt, the spirit of the animal was tended with care. Some tribes performed quiet rituals, laying tobacco or herbs beside the fallen creature. Others spoke softly to it, thanking it for the nourishment it would provide. It was believed that the spirit of the animal lingered nearby, watching to see if the respect of the hunter was true. If it was, the spirit would return to the world again, reborn in fur, in feather, in song. The meat was taken, shared, prepared. The bones were cleaned and used. The hide was tanned, the sinew woven into thread. The heart returned to the fire. Each act was deliberate, each one an acknowledgement of sacred exchange. In the quiet of night, when all labours were done and the stars had claimed the sky, the hunter would sit alone outside the village, the glow of embers reflecting in his eyes. He would close them, breathing slowly, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath him, that same rhythm that beat within his chest. Sometimes, in that stillness, the spirit of the animal would return in silence. It came not in form, but in feeling, a calm presence, a whisper carried by wind or owl's call, a reminder that death was not an end, but a return. The elders said that those who hunted with respect would dream more clearly, their sleep filled with visions of light, of rivers, of vast plains where the spirits of the animals roamed free. Those who hunted with greed would dream of silence, a stillness heavy with imbalance. For the earth remembers intention as much as action. Over generations, the people learned that the world of spirit and the world of matter were never far apart. The fires crackle, the rivers murmur, the whisper of pine, all were voices of the same eternal life. The hunt was simply one moment within that chorus, a reminder that taking and giving are one motion, that hunger and gratitude are two sides of the same truth. When a great hunter passed on, his bow and arrows were often buried with him. They were not tools for this world anymore, but guides for the next. The people believed that in the land of the ancestors, he would hunt once more, not for food, but for understanding, walking among the spirits of the animals who once fed him, each one luminous, each one forgiving. And so the circle continued, in life and in dream, in waking and in death. The hunters became the hunted became spirit, and the spirit became the wind that carried new life into the world again. The dreams never ended. They moved through generations like rivers, quiet, patient, unbroken, reminding all who listened that the true hunt was not for food, but for meaning. To understand the balance of all things, to remember that even in silence, the world speaks, and those who listen with humble hearts will always find their way. Across the endless lands, from the cold plains of the north to the red canyons of the desert, the art of hunting was never the craft of one person alone. It belonged to the people. Each hand, each eye, each memory shaped the skill of survival into a living tradition, passed not through written word, but through story, gesture, and sacred example. Long before dawn, when stars still shimmered over the sleeping village, soft murmurs began to rise from the earth lodges and teepees. The hunters moved quietly, their breath visible in the pale light. Children awoke to the faint rhythm of footsteps and the low hum of preparation, the same sound their ancestors had heard for countless generations. They would not yet join the hunt, but they watched. They learned by listening, by observing the silence that surrounded each movement, by understanding that the hunt began not with the chase, but with respect. The elders stood near the fires, their weathered faces illuminated by its orange glow. They spoke not of killing, but of balance. They taught that a hunter who took more than he needed would one day find the land silent, empty and cold. But a hunter who took with gratitude, who gave back through care, through ritual, through humility, would always find the earth abundant. The young listened, wide-eyed, to stories of hunts long past, of herds that once thundered across the plains like storms of living earth, of salmon that filled rivers until the waters shimmered silver, of the time when man and beast shared the same path and spoke through understanding rather than fear. Every story carried a lesson, not in words, but in rhythm, teaching patience, awareness, and connection. When the people hunted together, it was as if the entire village moved as one living being. Men, women, and children each held their purpose. Some drove the animals slowly toward hidden valleys or narrow passes. Others prepared fires or guided the movement from ridges above. Voices were seldom raised. Gestures and glances were enough. They read one another like they read the wind. In the great buffalo hunts, the coordination was astonishing. Hundreds of hunters might circle the herds in silence, waiting for the moment when the animals would turn in confusion and rush toward the chosen direction. The people would not chase in frenzy. They guided, shaped the motion, trusting in the wisdom of the group. And when the hunt ended, the work began. No part of the animal was wasted. The hunters skinned and dressed the meat. The women prepared and dried it. The elders offered prayers to the spirit of the herd. The hides became clothing and shelter. The bones turned into tools and ornaments. The tendons into thread. The hooves into glue. The fat into oil for lamps and care for wounds. Even the heart and liver were treated with reverence, first fruits of life, reminders that all nourishment was sacred. When the hunt returned to the village, celebration was not loud or boastful. It was calm, a quiet gratitude expressed in song, in the soft beating of drums, in the rising scent of sage upon the wind. Children danced around fires, not for conquest, but for thanks. The people knew that their survival was never their own. It was shared between the hunter, the hunted, and the living earth that sustained them both. Each tribe had its own ways. In the forests of the northeast, people hunted deer through patience, standing for hours in silence among trees, watching the flicker of movement in the undergrowth. In the icy north, the Inuit followed the migration of seals, whales, and caribou, their tools carved from bone and ivory, their knowledge of snow and sea unmatched. In the deserts of the southwest, the people learned to read the faintest signs of life, a footprint in the sand, a shadow that moved differently beneath the sun, a trail of feathers left by wind. But everywhere, in every land, one truth remained. Hunting was not domination. It was participation. It was a way of belonging. When the seasons changed and the hunts grew difficult, the people gathered to share wisdom across generations. Elders spoke of the migrations, the star patterns, the voices of animals that guided their movements. They traced maps not upon parchment, but upon memory, of rivers, ridges, and sacred groves where game returned year after year. These maps lived in the songs and stories, and as the young listened by firelight, they learned not only where to hunt, but how to see the land as family. The hunt itself was a lesson in patience. Children learned to walk silently, to feel the earth beneath bare feet, to sense the tension of the air before movement, to watch the behavior of birds and insects as signs of what lay unseen. They were taught that a good hunter never forced a path. He became part of it. He moved as wind moves, as water flows, unseen but ever present. Women too held vast knowledge of food gathering and small game hunting. They knew the cycles of plants, the habits of birds, the hidden nests and burrows that others might overlook. Their understanding of the land was deep, not through conquest, but through care. Their hands preserved the hunt by preserving the earth itself. When famine struck, it was their wisdom that guided survival. How to dry meat for lean seasons, how to store seeds, how to read the signs of coming storms. The strength of the people was never in one hunter, but in the harmony of all. Through this unity, the tribes endured, through droughts, winters, and wandering herds. Their knowledge was not written, but lived, in footsteps across the plains, in tracks through the forest, in songs whispered into the wind. And so, across centuries, the rhythm continued. Each generation stepped into the footprints of the one before. Each learned anew that life was not something taken, but something shared, a circle of giving and returning, woven through the heartbeat of the world. The land was the first teacher. Every ridge, every shadow, every current of wind carried its own lesson. To the native people, hunting was never separate from the earth. It was born from it. The way one hunted depended on where one walked, what one heard, what one smelled in the air. From the frozen edges of the Arctic to the humid breath of southern swamps, the land shaped the hands, eyes, and hearts of its people. In the far northern tundra, where winter held its long reign and the sun travelled low upon the horizon, the people hunted upon snow and silence. The world there was vast and white, broken only by the slow movement of caribou herds and the shimmer of ice upon the sea. The hunters moved across it like ghosts, dressed in fur, their faces hidden by frost. They built traps of stone and bone, and when they hunted seals, they waited for hours beside breathing holes in the ice. Stillness was survival. Even the smallest sound could carry for miles. When the moment came, it arrived quietly, the dark shadow beneath the ice, the whisper of water, the perfect patient strike. Further south, the forest of the Great Lakes and northeast offered a different rhythm. Here the air was thick with the scent of pine and cedar, and the forest floor was soft beneath moccasined feet. Deer and elk roamed through the dappled light, and hunters moved with the patience of trees themselves. They knew how to blend with bark and shadow, how to wait without stirring, how to sense the pulse of the woods through every breath. Their arrows were fletched with turkey feathers, their bows shaped from ash and hickory. They hunted not through chase, but through understanding, tracking animals not by sight alone, but by the faint bends in grass, the broken edge of a twig, the scattering of leaves left behind. The forest spoke in subtle ways, and those who listened could read its entire story. In the plains to the west, the world opened wide beneath the endless sky. Here the wind moved like an ocean, rippling through tall grasses, carrying the scent of the herds before they appeared. The buffalo was the center of life, not just a source of food, but of everything: shelter, clothing, tools, and spirit. The hunters of the plains rode upon swift horses, their bond with the animals as close as breath. But before the horse arrived, before the Spanish brought them to the continent, the people hunted on foot with courage and precision. They drove herds into natural enclosures or over cliffs known as buffalo jumps. The earth itself helped them hunt. guiding the thunder of hooves into the narrow path of destiny. Each hunt required great unity. Runners coordinated from afar, signaling through smoke or wave. The hunt was not merely for meat, it was an act of devotion to the land that sustained them. Every part of the buffalo was used, every loss mourned, every hunt remembered in song. Further west among the mountains and deserts, the land grew harsher, the game more elusive. Here hunters tracked deer, rabbits, and mountain sheep across rocky slopes and canyons carved by time. The silence of the desert was different, deeper, heavier. Sound did not echo. It vanished into the heat. To survive here was to understand scarcity, how to find life where others saw emptiness. The hunters learned the ways of stillness and reflection. They read the tracks written in dust. They felt the warmth of stones to know when the sun would set. They moved by the flight of hawks and the shadows of cliffs. The desert did not forgive impatience, but to those who honored it, it revealed abundance. In the smallest spring, the faintest trail, the whisper of a lizard through the sand. Along the rivers and coastal plains, the people hunted and fished by water's edge. They built canoes from cedar and birch, their surfaces smoothed by stone and patience. The water mirrored the sky, calm one moment, restless the next. They hunted beaver, otter, waterfowl, and deer that came to drink at dawn. They fished with spears and woven traps, reading the ripples, the flash of silver beneath the surface, the way moonlight touched the current and revealed life below. To these people, the river was alive, a living spirit that gave and took with the rhythm of the seasons. In spring, when the salmon returned, it was a time of joy and ceremony. Entire villages gathered along the banks, singing prayers of gratitude for the first fish caught. Its bones were returned to the water, ensuring that its spirit would tell the others to return again. In the swamps and wetlands of the southeast, hunting was a slow art of patience and intuition. The air was heavy with mist and the hum of insects, the water dark with reflections of cypress and moss. Hunters waded silently, their feet knowing the feel of mud, their eyes sharp for the movement of alligator, heron, or turtle. They used spears of cypress wood and bows that curved like the branches above them. Their knowledge of the water's flow and the habits of creatures kept them alive when the world seemed still. And in the high forests of the Pacific coast, where rain fell softly through giant trees and rivers roared with life, hunting and fishing became one. The people built platforms above streams to watch the salmon, their spears flashing like lightning in the water. They understood that the return of the fish marked the heartbeat of the seasons, and so their ceremonies mirrored that cycle, honoring the first catch, thanking the river, preparing the smokehouses that would preserve food through the long winter rains. Every landscape held its own spirit. Every region taught something different: endurance, silence, patience, gratitude. But in all places, the lesson was the same. Life was a circle, not a ladder. The hunter was not above the hunted. The land was not a resource, but a relative. When the wind carried the scent of the mountains down into the plains, or when the river's mist touched the trees at dawn, the people felt the unity of it all, that no matter where they hunted, they were always hunting within the same living world. The land shaped them, and in turn, they shaped their lives around it, not by force, but by listening, by remembering, by becoming one with the earth's breath. The earth turned, and with it, the lives of the people turned too. The seasons were not merely changes in weather, they were chapters in a living story, each one a teacher, a reminder, a breath in the endless rhythm of survival and gratitude. In the winter months, when the land slept beneath snow and silence, the hunt was both harsh and sacred. The air was sharp enough to cut through thought, and every step upon the frozen earth carried a sound that seemed to echo into the bones. The hunters moved slowly, wrapped in furs, their breath clouding the still air. They tracked deer and elk through the white forests, following the faint traces left in powder and frost. In this time, the world grew quiet. The rivers hardened, the winds whispered through bare trees, and the land seemed to hold its breath. The hunt became more than a search for food, it became a meditation on endurance. Every heartbeat, every flicker of life felt sacred, for winter did not offer easily. The people learned to respect its cruelty and its beauty alike. The villages glowed softly at night, fires burning behind hide walls, children listening to elders speak of ancient hunts. These were the nights of story, when the hunt was remembered not with pride, but with reverence, when tales of the ancestors were told, so that no one forgot the balance that must always be kept. As the sun began to return and the snow melted into streams, spring awoke the world with quiet song. The rivers burst with the rush of melted ice, and the forests came alive again with the sound of water, wings, and breath. It was a time of renewal, of planting, gathering, and soft hunting. The people watched the land carefully, waiting for the right signs. The return of geese across the sky, the sprouting of young grass where the buffalo would soon graze, the hum of insects rising from the thawing soil. In these signs, they read the language of the world. Deer shed their old coats and moved toward the valleys. Rabbits darted through new shoots of green. Hunting in this season was lighter, not for need, but for understanding. The people hunted only what they required, giving time for herds and flocks to grow strong again. They saw themselves as stewards of life's rhythm, not masters of it. Summer brought abundance. It was the season of movement, of great hunts and wide journeys. The plains shimmered beneath a blazing sun, and the herds moved in vast, thunderous waves across the horizon. From dawn until dusk, the air was alive, alive with insects, with the calls of birds, with the whisper of wind through tall grass. The buffalo returned in countless numbers, and entire tribes gathered for the great hunts that would sustain them through the year. It was a time of unity, of celebration, of deep gratitude. The people worked together, hunters, gatherers, tanners, cooks, elders, each role vital, each task sacred. In these days the camps filled with song and smoke. The scent of drying meat and fresh hides carried through the wind, mingling with the sweetness of sage and wildflowers. The land itself seemed to hum with energy, alive, giving, generous. The people honored it with every movement, knowing that what they took in summer must last through the long shadow of winter to come. Then came autumn, the time of preparation, when the air cooled and the first breath of frost touched the leaves. It was a season of gathering and gratitude. The world turned golden, the grasses faded, and the herds began to move once more. The hunters watched the migration with quiet respect. They knew this was the time to give thanks for the year's bounty, to ensure that no hunger would come when the cold returned. Smokehouses filled, storage pits were sealed, and the people sang the songs of completion. The fires burned longer at dusk, and the villages glowed beneath the deepening sky. Children ran through falling leaves, their laughter carrying softly through the forest. The elders sat near the flames, their eyes reflecting the embers as they spoke of the coming snows, reminding the young that every season carried both gift and burden, that joy was not in abundance, but in harmony. The seasons turned endlessly, each one flowing into the next like breath after breath. There was no line between them, only rhythm, a rhythm that echoed in the blood of the people, in the heartbeats of the animals, in the flowing of rivers and the sway of trees. To live was to move with that rhythm. To hunt was to listen to it. The people did not mark time with clocks or calendars, but with wind and rain, with frost and firelight, with the sound of geese returning home, with the sight of the first snow melting into the earth. And as the centuries passed, the wisdom of the seasons remained, a truth whispered through the generations, that the earth is alive, and those who move with her, rather than against her, will always find what they need. Time moved as softly as wind through grass. Generations rose and fell like waves upon the same eternal shore. The old ways endured, not in the noise of conquest, but in the quiet rhythm of those who listened to the land. In the hands of the elders, the tools of the hunt became more than mere instruments. A bow was not just wood and sinew. It was a living memory of the tree from which it came, of the animal whose tendons gave it strength, of the hunter whose patience gave it life. The arrow, carefully shaped from reed or branch, was carved with respect, its tip sharpened, not in haste, but with the understanding that each one held purpose. Each one could feed a family. Each one carried a prayer. The making of tools was a ceremony in itself. Children learned beside their elders, watching as flint was struck against stone, as bone was polished smooth, as feathers were bound with sinew and care. Each movement was steady, unhurried. It was said that if a tool was made in anger, it would fail in the field, but one made with calm and reverence would strike true, guided by the hand of the spirit world. The hunt, the preparation, the gratitude, all of it was one long conversation with the earth. And though time carried change, new tools, new lands, new hardships, the core truth never altered, that life could only thrive when taken with respect. When the world began to shift, when settlers came, when borders rose and herds dwindled, the people looked to the horizon and remembered. They remembered the smell of wet earth after rain, the feel of a bow drawn beneath an open sky, the sound of a river whispering beneath morning mist. They remembered that no power, no possession could ever own the breath of the wind or the spirit of a deer. Many of the old ways faded into memory, yet they did not vanish. They lingered in stories, in songs carried by the elders' voices, in dances that told the shape of forgotten hunts. They lived on in the care for the land, in the protection of forests and rivers, in the respect given to the animals who still roam the earth. And when the young walked among the trees or sat by a fire beneath the stars, they felt it still, that quiet pull in the heart, that memory older than words, the instinct that says, you are part of this world, not apart from it. The hunt, in its truest form, was never about conquest. It was about belonging. It was the thread that tied the people to the earth, the act that reminded them of their place within the circle of life. In every arrow loosed, there was gratitude. In every footprint left behind, there was humility. And in every breath drawn beneath an open sky, there was remembrance that all life feeds life, that nothing taken with reverence is ever truly lost. The land still holds those echoes. The plains still hum with the ghost of buffalo herds. The forests still whisper of hunters moving silently among the trees. The rivers still carry the songs of the salmon people, and the mountains still stand as they always have, watching, remembering. The people endure too. In ceremony, in language, in prayer, they keep the rhythm alive, not as something of the past, but as something eternal. For the old hunt was never only about food or survival. It was a way of seeing, a way of honoring life, a way of walking gently upon the earth. And so, as the final embers fade from the campfire, as the night stretches wide across the sky, we are left with their lesson that the world is alive and everything we touch touches us in return. The hunt never truly ends. It continues in the wind through the grass, in the whisper of rivers, in the eyes of the animals who still roam free. It lives in the quiet gratitude of those who remember, in the stillness between heartbeats, in the breath of the earth itself. And as dawn rises once more, casting its golden light across mountains, forests, and plains, the story of the native hunters lingers, a timeless reminder that to live upon this earth is to give and to receive, to listen and to honor, to walk softly where others have walked before, and to remember always that all life is sacred.